They used a live baby goat as bait. A Puerto Rican mayor led 200 armed volunteers into the dark to hunt the chupacabra, with cameras rolling right behind him. And that part is real. But the most disturbing thing in this story isn't the creature people thought they were chasing. It's how dead animals, rumors, and TV turned fear into something people could name, describe, and hunt. This is how Puerto Rico gave fear a name. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Lore, from Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Hit subscribe, fresh revelations drop every week. Ready for your next campfire debate. The baby goat was already trembling in the cage before anyone had seen a monster. That is where this story begins. Not with proof, not with claws, but with bait. Late in October of 1995 in Canóvanas, Puerto Rico, Mayor José Chemo Soto stepped under television lights in fatigues and spoke like a man preparing for war. Somewhere beyond the last houses, something was killing animals, and an entire island was about to decide what name fear should wear. Reporters followed him into the wet dark. Volunteers came with flashlights, nets, machetes, rifles, and the kind of courage people borrow when their neighbors have stopped sleeping well. Civil defense workers hauled the trembling goat toward the forest line near El Yunque. Then came the search, the shouts, the nerves, the sudden conviction that something had moved just out of sight. Nothing was caught, but something enormous had already entered the night. What exactly were they hunting that night? A blood-drinking predator with red eyes and spines along its back? An ordinary animal misread in the fever of rumor? Or the most dangerous thing of all, a story that had finally found a body? Because the Puerto Rican Chupacabra panic was never only about a creature in the hills. It was about what happens when dead livestock, camera lights, neighborhood talk, and public anxiety begin feeding each other until a legend walks on its own legs. Months before the safari, the story was smaller, sadder, and more intimate. In the spring of 1995, people began finding animals dead in ways that felt wrong. Goats, chickens, rabbits, dogs, cats. Some carcasses seemed to carry puncture wounds. Some looked strangely untouched. Some were found in the half-light of morning, stiff and unsettling and impossible to forget. For the people living through it, this was not folklore yet. It was a backyard loss, a farm loss, and the sick feeling that something had crossed the fence at night. That detail matters. The panic did not rise from nothing. The land had receipts. Animals really were dying. Families really were counting losses. People really were hearing odd sounds after dusk and waking to feathers, blood, or silence where there should have been noise. A dead goat is concrete. A frightened farmer is concrete. A neighbor's claim that something moved across the road at midnight is concrete enough to lodge in the chest. The mystery arose when those separate facts began to demand a single shared explanation. And then the name arrived, sharp as a machete and twice as useful. Chupacabras, the goat sucker. Most accounts credit Puerto Rican radio host and comedian Silverio Perez with tossing that name into the air in late 1995. And once it landed, it stuck. Listen to how much work that word does. It does not wander. It does not shrug. It already contains hunger, method, and a whole moral of the night. Unknown predator leaves the door open. Goat sucker slams it shut. Once the label spread, scattered incidents stopped feeling scattered. A dead chicken in one barrio and a mauled goat in another could now belong to the same invisible visitor. That is the first great transformation. The name standardized expectation was given before the creature itself had fully taken shape. It connected otherwise unrelated deaths. It gave witnesses a vocabulary. It gave journalists a headline that practically growled off the page. It made the rumor portable from one municipality to the next. And maybe most important of all, it turned private anxiety into public conversation. Once people could say the Chupacabra did this, they were no longer just describing damage. They were participating in the birth of a thing. But notice what the carcasses actually offered. They offered emotion, not certainty. Dogs can kill livestock. Mongooses can kill. Illness can weaken animals before scavengers arrive. Poor fencing and rough husbandry can turn an ordinary nighttime attack into a grotesque scene by morning. A puncture mark is real without proving blood extraction. A body can look drained without having been emptied by any supernatural mouth. Ambiguity, not absence, was the engine. The evidence was concrete enough to disturb and incomplete enough to invite 100 explanations. That is why stories like this spread so fast. Rumor does not thrive only where there is no evidence. It thrives where evidence hurts and refuses to explain itself. Dead animals are perfect fuel for that kind of fire. They are visible, emotional, and photographable. They also keep their silence. Into that silence rushes every suspicion already waiting in a community. The old fear of night predators, the newer fear of contamination, the half-joking talk about aliens, secret experiments, demons, government lies, and whatever else uncertainty is wearing that season. Very quickly, certain details became sacred. 2 punctures, no blood, clean kills, surgical precision, an attack unlike any ordinary predator. Whether every case really showed those traits no longer mattered once the pattern entered a cycle of repetition. These were not just observations anymore. They were story nails, hammered into memory until every fresh loss could hang from them, and blood above all changed everything. A predator that kills is terrifying. A predator said to drain blood feels perverse, intentional, almost ceremonial, like it is not feeding on meat, but on life itself. That is older than Puerto Rico, older than cinema, older than talk radio. Blood in the human imagination is never only fluid. It is family, spirit, contamination, sacrifice, inheritance, pollution, and covenant. Say an animal was mauled and people imagine nature. Say it was drained and people imagine violation. The dead goat becomes a message. The wound becomes a signature. Even later, when official examinations pushed back, the earlier image had already settled in. And once a community starts reading symbols instead of scenes, correction arrives too late. In January of 1996, government veterinarians tried to pull the story back to earth. Hector Garcia from the Agriculture Department's veterinary laboratory said roughly 20 autopsies had turned up nothing inexplicable. Many wounds looked like dog bites. Some animals had died from ordinary disease. Their cardiovascular systems were intact. He also noted that once the mystery had a name, more deaths were being reported through that frame. In plain language, the bodies did not support the island-wide claim that something had emptied them of blood. That should have been the end of it. It was not even the middle. By then, the legend no longer depended on any single carcass. One case could be dogs, another could be pneumonia, another could be scavengers, another might never be solved cleanly because the body had already been handled, moved, mourned, misread, or ruined before specialists arrived. Real losses were still happening, but they were being fed into a story bigger than any one farmyard could contain. And once that happens, case-level correction loses its grip. The public impression keeps growing larger than the files on the table. The atmosphere outruns the evidence. A veterinarian can settle one death and still fail to calm a whole island. That is how panics mature. Fear stops living in a single incident and begins living in a place's overall mood. After that, fact-checking is a man with a candle chasing fog through the hills. And then came the second creature, the media version. Local television, newspapers, and radio did not merely pass the story along. They gave it rhythm, repetition, and a stage. A dead goat in one town is a misfortune. The same type of story repeating night after night across the island begins to feel like a campaign. Repetition turns anomaly into a pattern. Pattern turns speculation into menace. Menace invites more people to watch, listen, call in, remember differently, and look over the fence at dusk with brand new eyes. The camera always knows which detail tastes strongest. It lingers on neck wounds, not decomposition. It returns to frightened witnesses, not the veterinarian saying the scene is messy and ambiguous. It loves the phrase bloodless carcass far more than it loves the sentence. Further examination is needed. This did not require bad faith. It only required attention, working the way attention always works. The strange detail wins the frame. The ordinary explanation arrives wearing muddy shoes and gets left outside. So the media did not simply report the Chupacabra, it helped build it. Each headline added bone, each call-in segment added muscle. Each sketch of red eyes and spines stitched another layer of skin onto the thing. Soon, the public was no longer just asking what killed the animals. It was asking what kind of creature is this? That shift is the real birth certificate. The moment a cluster of incidents becomes a being, rumor has crossed the river into legend. At first, the descriptions did not line up neatly. One person saw something hairy, another something scaly. One thought it hopped, another swore it floated. Some said it stank of sulfur. Others remembered something more like wet dog. One saw horns, another saw wings. From far away, that sounds like weakness. But legends do not need precision to survive. In their earliest days, they often live on wobble, contradiction, and heat. The details only need to be vivid enough to keep the next retelling alive. Then one witness helped give the chaos a face. In Canóvanas, Madeline Tolentino described a creature that seemed at once alien, reptilian, and almost human in its posture, with powerful hind legs and strange spikes along its back. Her testimony became one of the great shaping visions of the panic, not because everyone had seen exactly what she saw, but because public fear was hungry for a body plan. Once a memorable image enters circulation, later memories often begin to dress themselves in it. Years later, investigators would lay Tolentino's description beside the creature from the science fiction film Species, which had reached Puerto Rican theaters shortly before her sighting, and the resemblance was difficult to ignore. That does not mean she sat down and invented a monster out of whole cloth. It means the mind under stress is less a vault than a storyteller. Darkness, surprise, later conversation, televised sketches, even one haunting movie image can slip into memory until fear no longer remembers what it borrowed. That matters because people often treat witness description as either holy proof or total nonsense. But there is a third way to understand it. Description is evidence of cultural processing. It shows how anxiety learns to draw. A red eye here, a spine there, a stance borrowed from a nightmare, a texture borrowed from a film, and suddenly the island has a creature detailed enough to print on t-shirts and terrifying enough to keep children indoors. Fear had been fog. Now it had cheekbones. And Puerto Rico in the mid-1990s was fertile ground for exactly that kind of modern legend. The island had dense media, dense neighborhoods, fast-moving gossip, old supernatural traditions, lively paranormal debate, and a steady flow of American popular culture. It also lived with real strains: economic anxiety, political distrust, institutional fragility, and the old colonial habit of receiving explanations from above that never fully calmed the people below. None of that caused the Chupacabra, but it gave fear many roads, many microphones, and more than one costume. So no, this is not a story about Puerto Ricans being naive or primitive or somehow uniquely gullible. That lazy version tells you more about the outsider than the island. People in Puerto Rico were doing what human beings everywhere do when something frightening keeps happening, and official answers arrive thin, late, or contradictory. They compared stories, they tested ideas, they borrowed from religion, cinema, neighborhood wisdom, science talk, and old lore all at once. They were not abandoning reason, they were improvising under uncertainty. And the stakes were intimate. Livestock is not abstract wealth when you live beside it. A goat has a smell, a routine, a price, and a name. Chickens are part of the morning soundscape. Rabbits in cages are things children feed. Dogs guard the edge of home. When animals die violently in the dark, the message people hear is not only that nature is cruel, your fence is porous, your household is exposed. Whatever crosses this yard at night has already entered the family's map. That is why the blood motif struck so deep. A fox raiding a coop belongs to a world people understand. A creature said to drain blood belongs to another order entirely. It sounds not hungry but desecrating, not accidental but chosen. That symbolic excess is precisely what makes the story travel. It elevates common predation to legend-worthy. In one move, the attack ceases to be merely agricultural and becomes moral, spiritual, almost theatrical. It is no longer just loss. It is an omen. Around that omen gathered other explanations. Some people imagined an alien pet left behind by visitors from the sky. Others whispered about a laboratory thing, an escaped experiment, an animal altered by hands that wanted to play creator and lost control. Others heard something demonic in the sulfur, the red eyes, the nighttime attacks. Those theories mattered not because they were proven, but because they revealed where trust was already broken. Conspiracy is often fear wearing a lab coat, a halo, or a government badge. And on an island with long memories of outside power, medical harm, military presence, and decisions made far above local life, the idea that something strange might emerge from hidden institutions did not feel absurd to everyone. It felt legible. That is the part careless debunkers miss. Wild theories are rarely random. They are maps of mistrust. The alien story points in one direction. The secret experiment story points to another. The demon story points to a third. But all of them circle the same feeling. Something powerful is operating beyond ordinary protection. No one understood the theater of this moment better than Mayor José Chemo Soto. Former policeman, showman, protector, true believer, or some blend of all three, he turned rumor into civic performance. Once a mayor organizes a safari, the legend changes status. It no longer belongs only to frightened households and talk radio. It becomes an event. It gets uniforms, camera angles, official statements, and the irresistible charge that the state itself has stepped into the jungle to meet the unknown. So return to that wet Sunday night in late October of 1995. 200 volunteers, a caged goat, the black edge of the hills, flashlights cutting through brush, the coquille calling from the dark like a needle on the same groove, voices rising from the search line. Someone is certain that something sprinted past too fast to name, nothing solid dragged back under the lights. But the hunt itself became proof in many minds. Why else would a mayor lead it if there were nothing there? That is the trick public hunts perform. They are supposed to capture the creature, but they also legitimize it. A trap in the forest announces to the whole town that something worthy of trapping exists. And when the hunt fails, failure does not necessarily weaken the legend. It can make the thing seem smarter, quicker, more supernatural, more insulting in its escape. An empty cage in the morning does not always mean there was nothing there. Sometimes it says the beast is learning. By late 1995, the Chupacabra had already outgrown one municipality. The story spread through newspapers, gossip, roadside conversation, and the ordinary circuitry of island life. Reports multiplied. Witnesses became bolder. The creature's body grew richer with each retelling. Fear itself changed shape. The first question had been, what killed the animals? The newer question was, what kind of thing moves among us when the lights go out? That shift from practical mystery to public being is the hinge on which the whole panic turns. Then came the runway. In March of 1996, the Miami-based talk show Christina devoted a special to the phenomenon and carried the story to a vast Spanish-speaking audience. That matters because modern legends do not travel as easily as old ones. They do not wait for generations. They board satellites. They hitch rides on studio lights. They cross the water in the afternoon. Once the Chupacabra had a name, a face, and an emotional script, it was ready for export. And almost immediately, the legend proved its portability. In Sweetwater near Miami, a cluster of dead animals was quickly folded into the same story. But when zoologist Ron McGill examined the scene, he pointed to dog tracks, dog digging under a fence, and blood still present in the carcasses. In other words, he offered the sort of explanation legends hate most: ordinary, testable, and emotionally unsatisfying. It was a grounded answer. It was not a gripping one. McGill later remembered the real lesson of that day. The moment an elderly witness acted out her sighting of a hunched creature with red eyes, the cameras turned toward her and stayed there. Not the fence, not the tracks, not the blood. Her. That tiny pivot reveals the whole machinery. The scene that best explains an event is not always the scene that survives. The scene that survives is the one that glows brightest on screen. And bright fear almost always beats dull certainty. From there, the legend spread across the Dominican Republic, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the mainland United States. Not because one perfectly verified beast was marching across continents, but because the story was designed to travel. It was specific enough to be recognizable and loose enough to absorb variation. That is rare power. A good legend does not demand uniform evidence. It only demands a mood, a wound, and a name that arrives fast when people need one. And the creature itself was wonderfully elastic. In Puerto Rico, it was often alien and reptilian. Elsewhere, it could become more canine, more demonic, more bat-like, more local. Some said it flew, some said it leaped. Some saw claws, some hooves, some a monkey, some a lizard, some the devil in a crouch. A skeptic looks at that and sees collapse. A folkloric creature looks at that and sees survival. The more bodies it could wear, the more towns it could haunt. This was also why the Chupacabra felt both ancient and brand new. Puerto Rico was not culturally empty before 1995. The island street remembered older beast stories, from the Mocha vampire in the 70s to every local tale about things glimpsed where pasture meets shadow. But the Chupacabra was not simply an old rural spirit dusted off and renamed. It was a late 20th century hybrid, assembled from folklore, talk television, horror cinema, alien imagery, rumor, and the old ache of not being fully protected. Think about how such a story reproduces itself in everyday life. A child hears adults whisper at the table. A farmer tells a cousin about puncture marks. A radio host repeats the strangest detail. A newspaper sketch sharpens the spikes. A witness says she smelled sulfur. A neighbor says he heard something like a turbine in the hills. By the weekend, schoolyards, barbershops, markets, and porches are all carrying different organs of the same creature. The legend does not need agreement. It needs circulation. And inside that circulation, belief and skepticism do not sit at opposite ends of the room. They mingle. People joke about the beast and still call their children indoors earlier than usual. They mock the mayor's hunts and still keep pets inside after dark. They buy the shirt, laugh at the cartoon, watch the talk show, and then glance twice at the tree line before bed. That is how modern legends live, not by converting everyone into believers, but by making everyone participate a little. By 1996, the panic had already begun to breed merchandise and mockery alongside fear. The creature appeared in songs, jokes, cartoons, storefront novelties, and all the little carnival mirrors a modern media culture loves to hold up to a scare. Some people found that ridiculous, but commerce does not always kill a legend. Sometimes it embalms it. The joke keeps the image alive. The souvenir keeps the name in circulation. The monster becomes familiar without becoming harmless. You laugh, and still something in you checks the yard. This is why debunking alone rarely kills such a story. Solve one case with dog bites, another with disease, another with scavenging, and the larger atmosphere barely flinches. The legend has already moved above the details. It is living at the level of pattern recognition, distrust, and emotion. The public remembers the silhouette more easily than the necropsy. It remembers red eyes more easily than intact cardiovascular systems. It remembers the word blood more easily than the sentence, "No unusual findings were observed." The human mind is built for this. Once a vivid explanation becomes available, later events begin arriving pre-labeled. A strange death does not have to be interpreted from scratch. The answer is already standing at the gate. Then the mind does its favorite magic. It notices what fits and lets the rest sink quietly through the floorboards. The sulfur gets remembered. The wet dog smell gets lost. The eerie leap survives. The ordinary dog print gets trampled by the crowd. And none of us builds memory alone. We build it socially. You see something uncertain in poor light, then you tell your sister. Then the radio host tells it back louder. Then a newspaper artist gives it longer claws. Then a neighbor adds glowing eyes. Then a television reenactment stiffens the posture and narrows the face. Months later, what you remember may contain what you saw, what you inferred, what you were told, and what the culture had already decided a monster should look like. So the deepest lesson of the Chupacabra panic is not zoological. It is human. The story reveals how communities organize uncertainty when institutions cannot close the gap quickly enough. It shows how real harm can be woven into symbolic harm until the two are hard to separate. It shows how media and memory can collaborate without conspiring. And it shows how a legend becomes durable precisely because it helps people think with fear, not because it wins every forensic argument. That is why treating the whole episode as simple stupidity misses the point completely. The fact that no captured animal ever settled the matter is not what makes the story weak. It is what makes it revealing. The Chupacabra panic is a window into how modern publics create, circulate, and inhabit danger. It is a study in how a community takes losses that feel too strange, too intimate, too repetitive to remain nameless, and gives them a figure that can be pointed at, feared, argued over, merchandised, and remembered. Which brings us back to the goat in the cage. That trembling animal is the perfect symbol of the whole panic. The town wanted to trap a predator. What it actually trapped for one unforgettable night was the image of itself hunting uncertainty in the dark. The cage was real. The bait was real. The fear was real. But the thing moving fastest through Puerto Rico by then was not necessarily flesh. It was a story, jumping from pasture to newspaper, from television set to memory, from whisper to certainty. That may be why the Chupacabra refuses to die. Because beneath the spines, the red eyes, the talk of aliens and secret labs, it carries a question that still belongs to us now. When fear moves faster than facts, what do people trust first? The careful answer that arrives late, or the vivid one that arrives early and already knows their name? Please tell me what you think gave the Chupacabra its real power. The carcasses, the cameras, or the human need to make uncertainty visible. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.